Hey guys, Tom here, and I'm doing something a little bit different today. I just had a good, interesting conversation with Scott Harvey, who's the operations manager here in Calgary for Lime, the new bike share program here in the city. Of course, Lime is in dozens and dozens of cities in North America, and it's interesting because they're new to Calgary, but they're also looking at Calgary as a bit of an experiment in winter. The bikes are running all winter long, and they're trying some new things here. So you might be interested in this if you live in Calgary, but because of that experimental side of winter, you might be interested in this even if you live in another city as well. So we talked about a lot of things. I got some questions from people on Twitter. I put them all to Scott, and we had a good conversation. So check it out. Hey everybody, it's Tom here. I'm joined today with Scott Harvey, who is the operations manager.
Yeah.
Operations manager of Lime, not Lime Bike, Lime, right?
Just Lime.
Just Lime.
Yeah.
Okay, which is the bike share, or how would you describe Lime these days?
So we define ourselves as a micro-mobility company.
So in Calgary, Lime has just launched, and what that means is we have a cool new e-bike sharing program. It's new to Calgary. We were one of the last cities in North America, one of the last mid-sized cities to have any kind of bike share. So it's significant, but there's some interesting things happening here, which I think are probably relevant to people outside of Calgary as well.
Absolutely.
So let me just ask first maybe, why Calgary and why now?
Well, Calgary obviously being a city that has expended a lot of resources to build a world-class biking infrastructure. So we recognize that that's an important part of Calgary's sort of vision for the future. So we want to be part of that, obviously. Second of all, Calgary just was really the first city in Canada to come to that place where we could enter as a company and do it in a really, really thoughtful and mindful manner. So, you know, that just was timing was everything. And we really, as a company, said, do we want to launch, you know, we launched October 30th. We launched as a bike company in the middle of winter, but we really felt like Calgary was ready for it. Calgarians embraced it in a way that we were like blown away by how much they embraced it. So we've seen some great numbers come back in terms of ridership levels and things like that. And the weather has cooperated with us amazingly. So, you know, we've continued to be able to see those numbers go.
What kind of numbers? Do you have like numbers you can tell me? Relative to other cities or anything?
Sure.
Like that?
We don't talk about actual rider numbers, but what I can say is that on some of our best days, we saw ridership, new riders. Some days we're up in the like 300-400s new riders per day.
Okay, you mentioned earlier launching, a little trepidation about launching at the end of October.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of cities that have bike shares that run through the winter.
Right.
So why? Why at that time?
Obviously that was when we were in working with the city, we were able to launch.
Yeah.
There is a huge process there. It's, permitting and insurance and all of those things that need to go into us operating within the city and operating within the sort of constraints and needs that the city provides to us through the permit. So we wanted to make sure all the I's were dotted and all the T's were crossed before we, went into service. And so that's just what that date looked like. But with that said, we also said we're going to have a great opportunity to test the product in a winter market. We do operate in other winter markets in the United States, in the northern United States, so places like Minnesota, Detroit, Chicago, places like that. So we already have an understanding of what winter operations looks like with the product, but where we sort of have a question mark is what happens when the weather is really cold. Those northern United States markets don't necessarily get that same temperature that we do. So, obviously, again, we haven't had that opportunity with Calgary's weather, but I don't know if you've seen, there's bikes on the road that have mitts on the handlebars now. So we're doing some testing and trying to gather our own information so that, again, we can be cognizant of opening in markets like, potential markets, again, that are maybe in the future in Canada, other cities that, again, get that cold weather. do we want to stop operations in those cities, or do we want to continue through the winter? If that is something that the city can provide, i.e. the bike infrastructure is there, the bike lanes are being cleared of snow, things like that. If that's happening in a city, we want to be able to maybe operate throughout the winter. So Calgary's just going to be a really good test market as we continue to expand into Canada, that's where we're gleaning a lot of this information, is what's happening here right now.
So it's a bit of an experiment. I mean, I think it's an impressive thing to see the bar mitts on the bar just as a commitment to winter.
Yeah.
So it really is an experiment for you.
Yeah, and we know that the bike operates really well in snowy conditions and in winter conditions, where the question mark comes from performance is when we're getting down into minus 25, minus 30. How is the battery reacting to that weather? Are we seeing a loss of power? Are they okay? So, again, we're going to want to test that theory, so fingers crossed that we get some cold weather like that, as much as I hate to encourage that.
Yes, we like cold weather.
But we are in Canada, so at the end of the day, cold weather is part of our life, and so we really want to make sure that we're making decisions that are based on facts, not on, maybe we shouldn't operate for the winter in this city. We want to make some real factual decisions based on reality and based on what's going on here in Calgary.
And you launched in Calgary with e-bikes, which is that unique for the company? Most companies have both e-bikes and old-fashioned pedal bikes, right?
Right.
But right now, all we've got is e-bikes. What was behind that decision?
So, as a company, we've come to the decision that, not necessarily the decision, but we know from ridership information that our customers, when given the choice of a pedal bike and an electric bike, they will choose the electric bike most times. So from that point of view, when we decided to come to Canada, we said, let's put the electric bike into service there, because that's what customers are demanding. Yes, we do have markets in the United States and the one here in Canada that are e-bike only. So again, we're e-bike only because scooters aren't going to be part of that conversation here in Canada for a little while. So, we're going to work within what we can, which is the e-bike program. And it's just a really, really good product. It's robust. It can handle. We had some riders ride in that first real blast of snow that we got at the beginning of October. We had a couple members of the city had bikes, and they were riding the bikes, and they really said the feedback we got was that the bikes handled really well in the winter. So we just really feel like this product is the right product for Calgary too. The pedal bike is a great product, but again, we wanted something that would not only do well in the summer, but also have potential to do well during the winter. Because I think as a goal, we don't want to shutter operations every year just because the winter comes.
Yeah.
So it's about finding those fact-based solutions to those problems, and really this is what Calgary's all about. And again, we're the only location in Canada, so again, Calgarians should be proud of that fact as well, that we were the first. We beat out cities like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver.
All right, so everyone, pray for some cold weather so we get you some good data.
That might not be a popular thing, but
okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Yesterday I asked on Twitter for questions from people, and we got lots of really interesting ones. So I'm going to fire some of those at you right now.
Yeah.
Okay, one is about the zone. We talked a bit about launching in Calgary with e-bikes, and right now there's a zone, much like Car2Go, where the bike needs to be parked inside a zone, which is mostly the downtown area. Why that zone, and are there plans to expand the zone?
Absolutely. So between the city and Lime, we decided what the winter zone would look like, and then we'll have a summer zone. So the winter zone was restricted to the downtown core and the Beltline. So, I think that this is the first year of operations. So I think next year when we go into winter operations, the conversation will be a little differently, because from a mechanical sort of user and ridership point of view, we missed out on some communities that we think should have been included in that winter operation zone. But again, that's a great sort of learning curve for us as a company and for the city, so we can go back and have some really constructive conversations on what that looks like. But then come the summer, we will be full city operation.
City.
The whole city will have bikes.
Okay.
And so our fleet I don't have the final number right now, that's a continuing conversation with the city, but we will see for the summer months, we will see the fleet increase in size.
Right. And there's been some anxiety about people who've inadvertently left their bike outside of the zone. What happens? Are you charged more? What's going on?
Right now, there's really not any sort of punishment for leaving the bike outside of the zone. You can ride the bike. The app, when you're riding the bike and do leave the approved zone, the app will tell you you've left the zone, the approved zone. If you can please take the bike back to the approved zone. But ultimately, for us, we felt that rider experience was more important than you have to take that bike back into the zone. So we have the resources here in the city to make sure that those bikes that are leaving the zone for people to enjoy a bike ride, that we can get those products back into the proper zone in a very good amount of time.
Speaking of rules, let's have the helmet conversation, which is always a tricky one.
Yeah.
So just for some background, Alberta does not have a mandatory helmet law for pedal bikes, but it does for e-bikes.
Correct.
And Lime bike, unlike some jurisdictions where there is a helmet law, say Vancouver, for example, where helmets are provided with the bike share, they're not provided here.
Correct.
So that is also causing some anxiety. That's what I read from the questions I'm getting on Twitter. People are worried about getting tickets.
Yeah.
They're worried about the breaking the rules. We're very Canadian about it. Nobody wants to break the rules.
Yeah.
What are you hearing? Is there tickets being delivered? Or people being punished for it?
Haven't heard of any tickets being issued for riders on the electric bikes. From the perspective of meeting that requirement, Lime, that is 110% one of Lime's main goals, is to obviously work within the constraints of whatever the law or regulations are. And of course, rider safety is of paramount importance. So we're going to do what we can to encourage riders to wear a helmet when they ride our product. It is mandatory, so that is in the in-app messaging. That's actually right on the bike itself. And then we're going to continue, as now that the weather is hopefully going to start to improve or stay the way it has been lately, we're going to start to get more and more involved in some community organizations and things like that to help promote what we call Respect Your Ride. So that's a program that was launched company-wide, and we're going to, again, start to get that program here embedded in the city, so that then people can have access to get a helmet from us. So there's a lot of ways we can do that, and also that, again, we can start to have that conversation of why it's important to wear a helmet. We really looked at that program in British Columbia, the company that provides helmets with their rides. And, we just felt from, a couple of standpoints that wasn't the direction that we wanted to go. We really felt that it was a much better and much easier way to engage with the customers by having that conversation and by being able to provide people with helmets, should they need be. So again, that community engagement piece is really the key.
So the way it stands now is if you're using a Lime e-bike in Calgary, you should be bringing a helmet with you wherever you go.
Correct.
That's the expectation.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we want the consumer to provide their own helmet to again, meet the current regulation. From that perspective, again, there is the ability, as we sort of launch our community programs, that we'll be able to engage with customers that want a helmet, and we can provide a helmet. So we're going to continue to slowly evolve that process. But in the meantime, again, yes, we're asking Calgarians to be mindful of the fact that is a law, and we really want to make sure that everyone's abiding by that. And it's about safety, right? And that's number one priority. We want people to be safe when they ride the product. So it's definitely. I know people look at it as a hindrance, but at the end of the day, if you're going to ride the product, and we know that our ridership, majority of our ridership comes from people that work downtown and are either, say, great example, we're here at the public library, the East Village is right here. We've got a lot of riders that live in the East Village and come into downtown to do their work. Those are the kind of customers that we're wanting to ride our product. Average ride is about 6 to 10 minutes. So, again, it's people that are either at work and going for lunch, or at work and going to a meeting somewhere else. Make sure you remember your helmet, have it in your office, have it at your home, and just, remember it when you go to take your ride.
Pedal bikes, are they coming? You've got e-bikes in place now.
Yeah.
in the summer when things change, will it be pedal bikes?
No, we feel again that the electric bike is the sort of now the new sort of standard for our locations, and in particular in Canada, it's going to be e-bikes.
Which brings up another question that I get asked a lot too, is about the cost. The cost for an e-bike, well, people are saying it seems expensive. It's similar to what you pay on a car to go. And they feel like they've ridden them in the States and they feel cheaper, and the pedal bikes feel a bit cheaper too. So I've heard a lot of questions about the cost. That's the question. Why is it so expensive?
Well, from our point of view, we don't feel it's expensive. Obviously, when someone comes to me and says, well, if I take a 2 or 3 hour bike ride, it's going to be a lot of money, that's just not the customer we're necessarily trying to drive after. Our customers are people that, again, that's why downtown in any of our markets are usually the real big focus, because again, it's people that are, say, going from one building and going several blocks and don't want to get into a taxi or a cab and don't want to add to congestion. So then they're looking for micromobility solutions that can, take them where they need to be without it being, adding to that problem. So, we feel that the price is at where it's at currently is where it's at, but we're open to that conversation, and the more that we operate, again, this is the first time in Canada, first location in Canada, so a lot of firsts happening here in Calgary with that regard. So we want to make sure that obviously we hear what people have to say, and that feedback is really crucial. So we're going to continue to look at that.
Okay, a couple last questions from Twitter. When are you coming to Edmonton?
Good question. Again, Edmonton is one of those cities that is on the Lime list, and certainly from the perspective of working with the city of Edmonton, that conversation is well in hand and definitely happening. So, Edmonton is still a question mark in terms of exact dates, and I'm going to remain very tight-lipped in terms of the date. We don't have a date, so it's not even that I'm not saying it, but from the perspective of Edmonton, it's definitely on the list. It's definitely going to be a city we're going to want to operate in.
And I heard you say no scooters in the works for Calgary. Scooters are not coming to Canada?
No scooters in Canada as it stands right now. So from a legal standpoint, there are rules about electric scooters being ridden on public property. So currently the law, sort of across the land, each province is slightly different, but across the land is that electrified scooters are treated as a motor vehicle, and so by law they cannot be ridden on public property unless there's certain stipulations that they meet. And so, from that perspective, Lime is working with municipalities to engage in that conversation of when those laws were put on the books, and in terms of what our product looks like. So that's an ongoing conversation with most municipalities or provinces.
Well, that's it. Thank you very much. Welcome, Lime, to Calgary.
Yeah.
It's been a great benefit. I've been out there riding it a lot, so I see lots of you out there as well. And
thank you, Calgary.
Yeah, we've got lots to come as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Tom.